Okay, I'm going to give you a few tips on how to use the title templates in the title blocks theme of TitleMations. I'm going to select each one and press Q to connect them to the timeline, to the clip in the timeline, and let's step through them. The first one's called Block plus Outline, and it gives you two separate lines of text. It includes an on-screen control, and if you use it, it may look like only that first piece of text is moving, but if you then click back in the timeline, it will all jump into that new position. So that's the first thing to know about it. The second thing is you want to do most of your work in the title inspector, the first tab here, where you can choose whether or not it animates on. You can choose to add a fade to that opening animation. The position I just addressed directly in the viewer, but you could also drag right here in the inspector if you wanted, for instance, to keyframe it to move. I'll click again in the timeline for it to update. You can add your text changes directly here rather than going to the text inspector. So I can say, welcome. And then in the second line, I can write to TitleMations. You can also change the font right here and the size. And I'm purposely going to change it to make it a little bigger so we see a difference in the two here. And then for TitleMations here, I'll make this a little bit bigger as well, maybe something like that. As we scroll down, we've got tracking options for the text as well. If you want to do more with the text, like outline or drop shadow or some kind of stranger things, you can go to the text inspector for that. But generally, everything you need to do is right here with the font, the size, and the tracking, and the color. So, in fact, let's go to the second one and give it a different color here. And so if we scroll down a little bit further, we have some box parameters. And in all of these titles, there is a blue dot representing a particular break for a set of parameters. So this is a set of parameters for the text, and here's a set of box parameters. The padding adjusts how much extra box there is around the text, and it can help you make these two boxes touch each other. And then if I use the Y padding, we can make them touch vertically as well so they match nicely. So that's a quick way to adjust those so they match correctly. You can choose whether or not there's some fill on that first box, so it can be an outline just like the second one is, and whether or not that first box has an outline, which it does by default is the same color. So if you do change the color of this box, you can just drag this color chip onto the other one to change the outline to match, so they match perfectly. I'll go more to a blue and make them match. Then the second box, you can change the outline color. You can change the width of that box, and the first one will match the width change automatically. And then there's a second line offset, so you can move this over if you don't want them to touch each other, or you can move it over to make them touch each other. And you could also move it up or down if you wanted to do something like that. So you can do some nice offsets with this as well for some nice designs. And finally, you can choose to fill the second box with a color as well and change what that color is. So once I've made those changes, we have a new animation there for the first one. Now the second one's called Move Left All, and what that means is both the block and the text fly in to the left. They move left. There aren't a whole lot of parameters here, pretty straightforward, but let's make a few changes. You can choose to animate it on or off. You can change the animation speed. Let's slow it down. And I'll type balloon and give it a different font and maybe a different size. And we can play with the tracking. You can also have several lines of text by just hitting return. And by default, it's aligned to the left. In this case, I do want to change the alignment, so we'll go to the text inspector and change the alignment to center. And we can drag wherever we want this to end up on the screen. So let's say we want to end up over here, then it will fly in and land right there and go nice and slowly now. Back to the title inspector. I was adjusting position directly in the viewer, so you don't need to drag on it here in the inspector. We can change the color. The padding we've talked about before, but it's the same idea that we can bring it tighter to the text or further away. You can go below 0 here to make it very tight. So you may not be obvious, but you can go below 0. Change the block color, of course. And then you can add an outline and change the color of that outline if you want to have an outline on there as well. Finally, there's a shadow. You can put a drop shadow on there and adjust how blurry it is and how far away it is. And I'll reduce its opacity. So, and maybe even an angle. So pretty straightforward for this guy. The main thing is that it all flies in together, and you can drag it to wherever you want, and then it will fly in to that position, and you can change the speed. The next one is move left block, and what that means is just the block move. So if you watch it move in, and let's move this over. I'll move these guys over as well. Let's move this over onto a still piece of video. So now it flies in, but just the block moves in. So if I step through it, the block is flying in and revealing the text. That's the main difference. This doesn't have as many parameters to adjust, but it does have an on-screen control, and you want to use that. Whenever there's an on-screen control, use that to move everything rather than the title, because now you can move it off that block, which you don't want to do. So I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that. That's the main tip there. In the title inspector, everything should be pretty straightforward and clear. There's a banner margin around the whole thing, and shadow, and some different speed options as well. I won't mention move right all. Let me just move them over here so we can see them. They work the same way. Move right all will fly in and will fly out again. And you can choose whether or not they fly in or out. And the same thing with move right block is just the block. So a couple quick tips on how to get the most out of the title blocks theme of templates in TitleMations.